I stared at the voicemail icon on my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. My fingers trembled as I pressed play. Charlotte, you need to call me now. I don't know how else to say this, but you don't know who you're married to. The voice belonged to Sarah, my old friend, the one I hadn't spoken to in over a year, the one Daniel convinced me was toxic, jealous, out to ruin my happiness. I swallowed hard, feeling the cold grip of fear tighten around my throat. What did she mean? What did she know? My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, but one thing was certain. I couldn't ignore this. I glanced across the room at Daniel, sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone, completely at ease, the perfect husband, the perfect life. At least, that's what everyone saw, what I had convinced myself to believe. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I had known it for years. I just never let myself admit it. Daniel wasn't like other men. He wasn't violent. He wasn't overtly cruel. In fact, he was the opposite. To everyone else, he was charming, intelligent, endlessly patient. He had a way of making people adore him, of making them feel special, at least until they no longer served a purpose. And with me, his purpose had been clear from the start. I was his wife, his devoted, obedient, adoring wife, the one who made him look good, the one who listened when he spoke, who supported his ambitions, who adjusted her dreams to fit neatly into the space he allowed. It wasn't like I hadn't noticed the red flags. They were there, whispering to me in the quiet moments, in the way my voice seemed to shrink whenever he was in the room, in the way I had stopped calling my friends, stopped making plans without checking with him first, in the way he never raised his voice, but somehow I was always the one apologizing. I told myself that was love. Love meant compromise. Love meant understanding. Love meant staying, even when something deep inside you screamed to run. But now, that voicemail, that single message was cracking something open inside me, a door I had kept locked for too long. Who was that? Daniel's voice pulled me back to the present. He was watching me now, his blue eyes calm, unreadable. Just spam, I lied, forcing my fingers to lock my phone. I could feel his gaze lingering on me, assessing. Daniel never yelled, never demanded. He didn't need to. He had a way of making me second-guess everything, of making me question whether I was overreacting, being dramatic, seeing things that weren't there. I had spent years learning how to read his moods, how to navigate his silences, because the worst thing in the world wasn't his anger, it was his disappointment, the way he would withdraw, the way he would make me feel like I had failed him, like I was losing him and it was my fault. And so I had spent our marriage making sure I never did. I forced a smile and stood up, my knees unsteady. I'm gonna take a bath. I needed space, needed to think. His gaze didn't waver, but after a long pause, he nodded, returning his attention to his phone. I exhaled, heading to the bathroom and locking the door behind me. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles turned white. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror, a woman I barely recognized. There was a time I had been vibrant, passionate, full of life. Now I looked exhausted, faded, a shadow of the person I used to be. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Sarah's number. I shouldn't call her. If Daniel found out, he'd be hurt. He'd say she was trying to poison me against him, that she had always been jealous of what we had, and he would say it so gently, so convincingly, that I would believe him. Just like I always had. I closed my eyes. No, not this time. I tapped the call button. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked. Charlotte? Sarah's voice was urgent, breathless. Thank God, please listen to me. You're in danger. Daniel isn't who you think he is. He's done this before. My breath caught. Done what before? But before I could ask, there was a sharp knock on the bathroom door. Charlotte. Daniel's voice was calm, patient, but I knew better. I knew he had heard. Who are you talking to? I froze, my heart hammering in my chest as Daniel's voice drifted through the door. The call was still connected, but I couldn't say another word. My fingers fumbled as I ended it and shoved the phone into my pocket. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run to make it sound like I was busy, like I hadn't just been caught doing something I shouldn't. "I'll be out in a minute," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. A pause, then his footsteps retreated. I gripped the counter, my breathing shallow. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to make me pay for it in ways only he could. By the time I stepped out of the bathroom, Daniel was standing in the hallway, waiting. He didn't look angry. He never did. That wasn't his style. He was calm, his posture relaxed. But I knew better. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, his tone gentle, curious. I shook my head. "No one. I was just checking messages." A small smile played on his lips, but his eyes never left mine. "I heard you say a name. Sarah." I swallowed, my mind racing for an excuse. "She called earlier, just checking in. I didn't think it was worth mentioning." His expression didn't change, but I could feel the weight of his silence pressing down on me. Then he nodded, as if he accepted my answer. That's nice of her. She never liked me, though." I forced a laugh, trying to brush past him. "She's just protective." He caught my wrist slightly, not tight enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me. "I hope she's not putting things in your head." My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral. "Of course not." He studied me for a second longer, then released me. "I trust you, Charlotte." That was the worst part. Not that he accused me, not that he controlled me, but that he did it with a soft voice, with carefully chosen words that made me question if I was really doing something wrong. He never said, "I forbid you to talk to her." Instead, he planted the idea that I was betraying his trust just by having the conversation at all. By the time I went to bed that night, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting, that Sarah was just stirring up old fears, that Daniel was right. She never liked him. Maybe she was just bitter, jealous. Maybe I was lucky to have him. I woke up to a missing phone. My pulse spiked as I checked the nightstand. Then the dresser. Then my bag. Nothing. I found Daniel in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing was wrong. My phone sat next to him on the counter. He glanced at me as I entered, smiling as he pushed my cup toward me. "You left this unlocked last night. I saw Sarah texted you again." A cold chill ran down my spine. I reached for the phone, but he placed his hand over it, holding it in place. "Why are you lying to me?" His voice was quiet, but it was sharper this time, more direct. My mouth went dry. He exhaled, shaking his head like he was disappointed. "I don't understand why you let people like her interfere in our marriage." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Daniel, it's just Sarah." "She's not just Sarah. She's trying to turn you against me." "She's my friend." His grip on the phone tightened. "No, she's not. Real friends don't try to destroy relationships. Real friends don't make you doubt the person who loves you." I wanted to fight back. I wanted to say, real love doesn't mean taking my phone in the middle of the night, but I knew how this worked. If I pushed too hard, he would twist it around until I was the one apologizing, until I believed that I had done something wrong. So I took a deep breath and softened my tone. "I don't want to fight." He studied me for a moment, then sighed and handed me the phone. "I just don't want to lose you." I should have felt relief, but all I felt was exhaustion. The next few days, I forced myself to act normal. I responded to Sarah's texts with short, neutral messages. I deleted her calls before Daniel could see them. I told myself it was just easier this way, that I would handle it when the time was right. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I pushed too hard. Afraid of what I would find if I let myself believe Sarah. Afraid of what I already knew deep down. And then, one night, Daniel came home late. I had fallen asleep on the couch, and the sound of the door unlocking jolted me awake. I sat up, blinking as he walked in, his movement slow, deliberate. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice groggy. He loosened his tie, watching me carefully. "Late meeting?" A familiar unease curled in my stomach. "You didn't say you'd be late." His lips pressed together. "Do I have to check in with you every second of the day?" I looked away, suddenly feeling small. "That's not what I meant." He crossed the room, tilting my chin up so I had to look at him. His touch was gentle, but the weight behind it wasn't. "I think you're becoming paranoid, Charlotte." The words stung because they were designed to. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I just worry, that's all. A slow, knowing smile crossed his face. That's why I love you. You care too much. He kissed my forehead, and just like that, the conversation was over. But something inside me had shifted. I didn't believe him anymore. That night, as he slept beside me, I unlocked my phone and scrolled through Sarah's messages. The last one made my stomach drop. I found something, Charlotte, you need to see it. I stared at the screen, my fingers numb. Daniel stirred beside me, and I quickly locked the phone, my heart racing. I didn't know what Sarah had found, but I knew one thing. It was only a matter of time before I found out the truth. I waited until Daniel left for work before I dared to call Sarah. My hands were sweating as I locked the bedroom door behind me, my heart pounding as if I were about to commit a crime. Maybe, in Daniel's eyes, I was. The call barely rang before she picked up. Charlotte. Her voice was urgent, breathless. Are you alone? Yes, I whispered. Listen to me. I found something. I've been digging and I don't even know how to say this. Just tell me, I said, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers ached. She inhaled sharply. You're not the first. The words sent a wave of cold through my body. What? There was another woman, before you. I think there were more, but I found one for sure. Her name was Lauren. She was engaged to him years ago. She left, Charlotte. Disappeared overnight. No trace of her anywhere. Her family hasn't heard from her since. I pressed a hand to my forehead, feeling dizzy. No, that doesn't make sense. I found an old forum post, Charlotte, from her sister, begging for information. She was terrified of him, said he made her feel like she was losing her mind, that he isolated her, controlled her, gaslit her until she didn't know what was real anymore. The world blurred at the edges. It was impossible. It was true. I thought of the times I had felt like I was unraveling, the way Daniel twisted things, how he made me doubt myself. I had told myself I was being sensitive, paranoid, ungrateful, but what if I wasn't? What if I had just been trained to believe I was? Sarah kept talking. Lauren worked at a law firm in Chicago. One day, she just quit, packed her things and vanished. Her fiancé, Daniel, claimed she ran off with someone else, but her sister never believed it. She said Lauren was scared, that she tried to leave before, but he always found a way to pull her back. I couldn't breathe, because I knew how it felt. To feel like leaving was impossible, to feel like you weren't allowed to leave at all. Charlotte? Sarah's voice cut through the fog. I need to go, I whispered, hanging up. My whole body was trembling as I set my phone down on the nightstand. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to keep the shaking under control, but it was no use. My mind was racing through every moment of the past 5 years, every manipulation, every time I had doubted my own instincts. And I knew I had to get out. I pulled out a suitcase and started shoving clothes into it. My hands were unsteady, but I kept going, forcing myself to move. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew I couldn't be here when Daniel came home. I grabbed my phone, opening my banking app to check my accounts. My stomach dropped. One of my credit cards was missing. The savings account I had before I married him was empty. I felt like I was going to be sick. Daniel had access to everything. He had slowly taken control of our finances over the years, insisting it was easier if he handled the bills, the investments, the bank accounts. I had let him because I trusted him. I had nothing. I sank onto the bed, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. This was how he did it. This was how he kept me here. I pressed my palms into my eyes, willing myself not to cry. I had to think. I had to figure out my next move. I reached for my phone, opening a new message to Sarah. I need help. I had barely hit send when I heard the front door open. Panic shot through me like ice. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. I scrambled to shove the suitcase under the bed, my fingers fumbling as I yanked the covers over it. My mind was screaming at me to act normal, to hide the fear in my eyes. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Then he was there. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching me, His face was unreadable, but his posture was stiff. "What are you doing?" he asked. My mouth went dry. I was just organizing the closet." His eyes flickered to the bed. I knew he saw the way the covers were slightly raised. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I left work early," he said, his voice even. Something didn't feel right. I forced myself to smile. "You don't have to worry, everything's fine." He tilted his head, studying me the way a predator studies prey. Then he sat on the edge of the bed. His hand moved to the comforter, his fingers trailing over the fabric until he reached the lump underneath. My stomach twisted into knots. "What's this?" he asked, his voice still calm, still soft. I didn't answer. He pulled back the covers, revealing the suitcase. The silence was suffocating. His fingers brushed over the handle, and for the first time, I saw something break in his expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pain. It was something worse. Amusement. Like I was a foolish child who had tried and failed to outsmart him. "Charlotte," he murmured, shaking his head, "where were you planning to go?" I tried to swallow, but my throat was too tight. His smile widened. "You were just what?" I had no answer, because no matter what I said, he would turn it against me. He always did. He stood up slowly, stepping toward me until he was inches away. I could feel the warmth of his breath, the steady rise and fall of his chest. "Do you think you can leave me?" The way he said it made it sound absurd, impossible. And maybe it was. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was gentle, affectionate. But his eyes were cold. "You don't have anywhere to go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No money, no one who would take you in. You need me, Charlotte." I squeezed my eyes shut. He was right. He had made sure of that. I felt his lips press against my forehead before he turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, shaking. The front door shut a moment later. I sank onto the bed, gasping for air, trying to keep myself from falling apart. Then I picked up my phone, staring at the unread message from Sarah. I had two choices. Give in, accept that I was trapped, or find another way out. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my body tense with the awareness that Daniel was only a few feet away. His breathing was slow, steady, but I knew better than to think he was fully asleep. He never truly let his guard down, not when he felt like he was losing control. I could still hear his voice in my head. "Do you think you can leave me?" The worst part was that he was right. He had stripped me of everything, my money, my independence, my confidence, so carefully, so slowly, that I hadn't even realized it was happening. And now, when I finally saw the bars of my cage, he was standing right there, daring me to try and break free. I turned my head, watching the faint outline of his body in the darkness. I thought about Lauren, the woman who had disappeared. Had she tried to leave too? Had she failed? Or had she gotten out before it was too late? I wasn't going to wait to find out. I made a decision then. I wouldn't run, not yet. He expected that. He wanted to see me panic, to make a mistake, to confirm that I was just some irrational, emotional woman who needed him. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I would play the role he expected. I would smile, I would act like I had come to my senses, and in the meantime I would find a way to take back what he had stolen. By morning, I had forced my nerves into submission. When I walked into the kitchen, Daniel was already there, drinking his coffee like nothing had happened. "Good morning," I said softly. He looked up, his eyes flickering with interest. "You seem better." I gave him a small smile. I just needed to clear my head. I don't want to fight anymore. His lips curved, but I saw the careful calculation in his eyes. "I don't want to fight either, I just want us to be okay." I nodded, stepping closer. "Me too." I let him kiss my forehead, let him wrap an arm around my waist. Every second of it made my skin crawl, but I didn't let it show, because now I had a plan. Over the next few days, I played my part. I let him believe I was pulling away from Sarah. I even left my phone out in the open, unlocked, knowing he would check it. I made sure our conversations were short, vague, nothing that would set off alarms. I went through my routine like everything was normal. Except now, every move I made had purpose. First, I needed money. Daniel had locked me out of our shared accounts, but I still had access to our grocery credit card. He had trained me not to spend without permission, but now I used that training against him. I started buying small things, gift cards, extra cashback transactions, things he wouldn't question. I collected whatever I could, hiding it in places he wouldn't think to check. Next, I needed a place to go. Sarah was the obvious choice, but I knew Daniel would suspect that. I had to be smarter. I went through old contacts in my phone, looking for someone he wouldn't think of. Then I found her, Lisa. We had been close once, years ago, before Daniel convinced me she was a bad influence. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but when I sent her a message, just a simple, "Hey, I know it's been a while, but I could really use a friend," she responded almost immediately. Of course she remembered. Of course she knew. And of course she would help. With every piece of my plan falling into place, I felt the weight on my chest start to lift. Then Daniel changed the game. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when he came up behind me. "I've been thinking," he said casually, "we should take a trip." I set the plate down, forcing myself to stay calm. A trip? Just the two of us. No distractions, no Sarah, just us, getting back to what really matters. My blood turned to ice. He knew. I didn't know how, but he knew, maybe not everything, but enough. And he was cutting off my escape. I turned to face him, searching his expression for any sign of weakness, but there was nothing, just that same unreadable calm. "That sounds nice," I lied. "When were you thinking?" "I already booked it." His smile widened. "Tomorrow." Panic surged through me. I wasn't ready. I had money, but not enough. I had a plan, but it wasn't solid. If he took me away, I didn't know if I would ever come back. I had to move faster. That night, I packed a small bag, just the essentials. I couldn't take the suitcase, not after what had happened last time. I kept it hidden in the back of the closet and sent a single message to Lisa. "I need to leave. Tonight." Her response was instant. "Tell me where. I'll come get you." I inhaled sharply, my pulse racing. This was it. I left my phone on the nightstand just in case he checked, and slipped out of bed as quietly as I could. I crept through the dark, my heart pounding with every step. I had almost made it to the front door when the lamp flicked on. Daniel sat in the armchair watching me. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look surprised. He just smiled, shaking his head like I was a child who had disappointed him. "Charlotte," he murmured, "you really never learn, do you?" My mouth was dry, my body frozen. He stood slowly, stepping toward me with deliberate, measured steps. "Where were you planning to go?" I swallowed hard. He reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Did you really think I wouldn't see this coming?" My pulse pounded against my skull. He knew. He had always known. But that didn't mean I had lost. I exhaled, steadying myself. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice soft, "I don't want to fight. I need some space." His fingers brushed my cheek, almost affectionate. "You don't need space. You need me." I forced myself to nod. "You're right." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then let's go to bed." I hesitated. And in that moment, I made a choice. I turned on my heel and ran. He was faster. He grabbed my arm, yanking me back hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. My back hit the wall, his hand wrapping around my wrist like a vice. "Stop," he said, his voice still maddeningly calm. I struggled, my mind racing. Then, headlights flashed through the window. "Lee?" Daniel turned toward the door for just a second. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the nearest object, a framed photo from the table, and slammed it against the side of his head. He let out a sharp grunt, stumbling back just enough for me to break free. I ran. I didn't look back. I tore the door open, sprinting into the night just as Lisa's car screeched to a stop in the driveway. The last thing I heard before I dove into the passenger seat was Daniel's voice calling my name. But I didn't stop. I wasn't his anymore. Lisa drove fast, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The moment I slammed the car door shut behind me, she hit the gas, tearing down the street before Daniel could step outside. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the roar of the engine, the blur of streetlights flashing past the window. I could still hear him, his voice calling my name, that maddening, patient tone, like he was speaking to a wayward child. Like this was just another one of my mistakes he'd have to fix. I dug my nails into my palms, trying to ground myself, trying to stop my hands from shaking. Lisa glanced at me, but didn't say anything. She just drove. Only when we were several miles away, when my neighborhood was far behind us, did she finally break the silence. "Are you okay?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I don't know." She nodded, eyes still on the road. "Where do you want to go?" I swallowed hard. I hadn't thought this far ahead. I had spent so long trying to figure out how to escape that I hadn't stopped to consider what came next. My bank account was empty, my credit cards frozen, I had no job, no real safety net. And Daniel wasn't going to let me go easily. "Somewhere safe," I said finally, "just not anywhere he'd think to look." Lisa nodded like she had already considered that. "I have a friend, her name's Ava, she has a spare room. We'll go there." I exhaled, my body sagging against the seat. "Thank you." She reached over, squeezing my hand briefly before returning it to the wheel. "You don't have to thank me." We drove in silence for a while. The city faded behind us, replaced by the dark stretch of highway. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I let myself relax, I saw his face, that calm, knowing smile, the way he had been waiting for me. He knew I was leaving. He let me think I had a chance, let me get as far as the door before he stopped me, and that terrified me more than anything, because if he knew, then that meant he had a plan too. I forced the thought away. I was out. That was all that mattered. We pulled up to Ava's house just past midnight. It was small, tucked away at the end of a quiet street. A single porch light flickered on as Lisa parked, and the front door opened before we even stepped out. Ava stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her dark eyes scanning me with quiet assessment. "You're safe here," she said, like she could see the fear still clinging to my skin. I nodded, stepping inside. The house smelled like coffee and something floral. It felt warm, lived in, a place untouched by Daniel's presence. Lisa followed me in, closing the door behind her. "You can stay as long as you need," Ava said. "No questions, no pressure, just breathe." I wanted to believe that was possible. I barely remembered falling asleep, but when I woke up the next morning, I felt like I had been hit by a truck. My muscles ached, my head throbbed, and for a brief, blissful second, I forgot where I was. Then it all came crashing back. Daniel, the escape, the fact that he wouldn't let this go. I sat up, heart hammering, expecting to hear the sound of his key in the lock, his footsteps in the hall, but there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, the distant sound of Ava moving around in the kitchen. I was safe. For now. I forced myself out of bed, stepping into the hallway. Ava was at the counter, pouring coffee, while Lisa sat at the table, scrolling through her phone. They both looked up when they saw me. "Morning," Ava said, sliding a mug toward me. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the warmth ground me. "Did he?" Lisa shook her head. No sign of him. Yet? The yet made my stomach twist. I stared down at the coffee, my thoughts racing. He's not just going to let me go. I know. Lisa's voice was grim. She reached into her bag and slid something across the table. A burner phone. I frowned. "What?" "He's probably tracking your old one." A chill ran down my spine. Of course, Daniel had access to everything, my passwords, my accounts. If I used my old phone, he'd know exactly where I was. I powered it off immediately. Lisa nodded approvingly. "Good. Now we need a plan." A plan. I had spent so long just trying to leave that I hadn't let myself think about what happened after. I had to disappear, and I had to make sure Daniel couldn't pull me back in. Lisa leaned forward. "I have a friend who works at a shelter. They help women in situations like this. New identities, legal aid, restraining orders." The words made my stomach tighten. A restraining order, it seemed so final. But that was what Daniel had done to me, made me second-guess even the things meant to protect me. I nodded slowly. "Okay." Ava set down her cup, and we need to be prepared for whatever he does next. I looked at her, my hands tightening around the mug. What do you mean? She exhaled. Men like him don't just let go. He'll come looking for you, and if he can't find you, he'll try to control the narrative. He'll turn people against you, make you look like the unstable one. A sinking feeling settled in my chest. It made sense. Daniel had spent years making himself look perfect, the charming, patient, loving husband. If I disappeared, he wouldn't let that image crumble. He would make sure people saw me as the problem. As if on cue, Lisa's phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face darkening. Who was? I asked. She turned the screen toward me. My stomach dropped. It was a post on social media, Daniel's account. A picture of us, one from years ago, smiling at some event, looking happy. The caption read, "Charlotte, if you see this, please come home. I love you. We can fix this." The comments were already flooding in. Oh my God, what happened? Praying for you both. She'll come back. She just needs time. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding. He was playing the perfect husband, the heartbroken victim, and I knew exactly what came next. If this didn't work, if I didn't come crawling back, he would turn it against me. He would make me look irrational, unstable. He would take everything. Lisa met my eyes. You need to move fast. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to push the fear aside. I had gotten out. That was the hardest part. Now I just had to make sure he never found me again. I spent the rest of the day reading and rereading that post, watching the comments pile up like dry leaves waiting to catch fire. Daniel had planned this perfectly. He knew exactly how to manipulate people, how to paint the right picture. The heartbroken husband left behind by his unstable, impulsive wife. He wasn't chasing me. He was calling me back, making sure everyone thought he was the victim before I could even begin to tell the truth. The worst part was how well it worked. I saw familiar names in the comments, people I had once considered friends, colleagues, even distant family members, all of them blindly buying into his carefully crafted performance. She'll come back. She just needs time. He's such a good man. Stay strong, Daniel. I wanted to scream. Lisa reached over, taking the phone from my hands. Don't read that garbage. I exhaled sharply, pressing my palms into my forehead. They believe him. Of course they do, Ava said from across the room. That's how men like him work. They control the narrative before you even realize a story is being told. Lisa put my phone down, her jaw tight. We can't let him win. I almost laughed. Win? That was what this was, wasn't it? A game to Daniel, a battle for control. And I had spent so long believing I was playing a different one, believing that if I just loved him enough, tried hard enough, I could make things right. I wasn't playing anymore. I sat up straighter. The shelter, the lawyer, I need to do it now. Lisa nodded. I already set up a meeting. Eva tapped her fingers on the table. We should prepare for the next step too. If he doesn't get what he wants, he's going to escalate. A bitter taste filled my mouth. She was right. The next morning, Lisa drove me to a small legal aid office on the other side of town. The woman I met with, Rebecca, was calm and direct. She had seen this before, too many times. You need to file for a restraining order, she said simply. I hesitated. He hasn't hit me. Rebecca didn't even blink. That doesn't mean he isn't dangerous. I swallowed hard. She slid a stack of paperwork across the table. We'll file an emergency order first. It won't last forever, but it'll give you time to build a stronger case. Do you have any proof of his behavior? Messages, emails, financial records? Proof. I felt sick. He had made sure there was almost nothing. He didn't leave bruises. He didn't send threatening messages. Every form of abuse had been carefully designed to be invisible. I have one thing, I said finally. A voicemail from my friend Sarah. She warned me about him. Rebecca nodded. That's a start. We can also use his social media post. It shows he's trying to manipulate the situation. It won't be enough on its own, but it helps. I gripped the edge of the table. Will this stop him? She hesitated. A restraining order is a piece of paper. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it gives us legal backing. If he tries to come near you, you'll have the law on your side. It wasn't enough. But it was something. I signed the papers. When we left the office, my hands were still shaking. Lisa didn't say anything, just gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze as we drove away. But the moment we pulled up to Ava's house, I knew something was wrong. A black car was parked across the street. Lisa cursed under her breath, gripping the wheel. Is that? Yeah, Daniel. I couldn't see his face through the tinted windows, but I knew it was him. My stomach twisted. How did he find me? Lisa's fingers tightened around the wheel. I don't know, but we can't stay here. Ava stepped outside, her eyes locking onto the car immediately. She didn't hesitate. She marched straight up to it, knocking on the window. The door opened, and it wasn't Daniel. It was Jessica. I stared, my breath catching in my throat. Jessica, his coworker, his friend, the woman I had always suspected but never had proof of. She stepped out, crossing her arms. Charlotte! My blood ran cold. Lisa was out of the car before I could stop her. What the hell are you doing here? Jessica didn't even flinch. I need to talk to Charlotte. Alone. No chance, Lisa snapped. Jessica ignored her, turning back to me. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something behind her eyes, something that didn't quite match the woman I had imagined in my head. Please, she said quietly, just 5 minutes. Lisa glanced at me, waiting for my call. Every instinct told me not to trust her, but I nodded. Jessica exhaled, looking relieved. Lisa hesitated, then took a few steps back, still watching like a hawk. I crossed my arms. If you're here to convince me to go back, don't waste your breath. Jessica shook her head. I'm not. I narrowed my eyes. She looked over her shoulder like she was afraid someone would hear her. Daniel doesn't know I'm here. That was the first time she looked nervous. I studied her face. She didn't look like a woman who had won. She looked exhausted. It was you, she said finally. The word sent a jolt through me. Jessica looked down, inhaling shakily. Years ago, before you, I thought I was different, that he would never treat me the way he treated the others, but I was wrong. I felt my pulse in my throat. She looked up, and for the first time I saw something I hadn't expected. Caesar. I tried to leave him, she whispered, but he made sure I couldn't. He ruined my life, Charlotte, and now he's going to do the same to you. The air felt too thick, too heavy. Then why are you still here? I asked, my voice hoarse. Her jaw clenched. Because he made me believe there was no way out. But you still have a chance. I swallowed hard. What does he want? Jessica hesitated. He's planning something. I don't know what, but he's angry. He's losing control, and he won't let that happen. A chill ran down my spine. She stepped closer. Leave, now, before it's too late. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. Why are you helping me? She hesitated, then finally she whispered, because no one helped me. I didn't know what to say. Jessica took a step back. I have to go. If he finds out I was here, she shook her head. Just be careful. She turned, slipping back into the car, and drove away. Lisa rushed to my side. What the hell was that? I stared after the car, my mind spinning. Jessica wasn't here to help him. She was running, too. And if Daniel was truly losing control, then this wasn't over. Not yet. I didn't sleep that night, even after Lisa and Ava double-checked the locks, even after we turned off the lights and pretended that everything was normal. I couldn't stop hearing Jessica's voice. He's losing control. You won't let that happen. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my body too exhausted to move but my mind racing too fast to stop. I had spent so much time being afraid of Daniel, of what he might do, of how he could twist my life into something unrecognizable. But now, the fear felt different, sharper, more urgent. Because he wasn't gonna let me go. He was gonna make me pay. By morning, I had made a decision. Lisa and Ava were already awake when I stepped into the kitchen, their faces tight with concern. They didn't ask if I had slept. They knew the answer. I need to go, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Lisa frowned. Go where? Somewhere he can't find me, a shelter, a different city, anywhere but here. Ava exhaled, nodding like she had already seen this coming. It's the right move. Lisa looked less convinced. Charlotte, are you sure? You shouldn't have to be the one to disappear. He's the problem. I swallowed hard. I know, but this isn't about fairness. It's about surviving. Lisa's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. An hour later, we were on the road. I sat in the back seat, watching the city disappear behind me, my stomach twisted into knots. Every mile we put between me and Daniel felt like a weight lifting off my chest. But it wasn't gone yet. It wouldn't be gone until I knew he couldn't reach me. We drove for hours, past the places he would check first, past the places I used to go. The plan was simple. Get to the shelter Lisa's friend had recommended, get legal help, and then figure out the rest. But nothing about Daniel was simple. Lisa's phone rang just after noon. She hesitated before answering. Hello? I watched her expression shift, her knuckles tightening around the wheel. What? She snapped. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. Lisa pulled the car over, putting it in park before turning to look at me. Her face was pale. That was Sarah, she said quietly. Daniel went to her house. My breath caught. She's okay, Lisa added quickly. She didn't tell him anything, but he's looking for you, Charlotte, and he's not hiding it anymore. I pressed a hand to my forehead. Of course. He was done playing the patient, heartbroken husband. That act had an expiration date, and now he was shifting to something worse. Eva leaned forward. We have to assume he'll go after everyone you know. I closed my eyes. I know. Lisa's voice was grim. So what do we do? I inhaled shakily, trying to push past the fear, trying to think. Daniel expected me to run. He expected me to keep moving, to stay on the defensive while he hunted me down. I had been playing his game this whole time. It was time to stop. I opened my eyes. We go to the police. Lisa blinked. Charlotte? I should have done it sooner. My voice was steadier now. He's not going to stop. He's not just looking for me. He's showing me that he can get to anyone I care about. Eva nodded. She's right. A restraining order isn't enough. We need to make sure there's a record of everything he's doing. Lisa hesitated, then sighed. Okay. We turned around. For the first time in years, I was running toward something instead of away. The police station was cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A woman at the front desk took my name, barely looking up as she handed me a clipboard of forms. It wasn't like the movies. No one rushed to help, no one gasped when I told them I was in danger. It was just paperwork, another case, another problem to process. But it was something. An officer finally called me back, his expression neutral as he gestured for me to sit. Tell me everything, he said. So I did. I told him about the years of control, the financial abuse, the isolation. I told him about the voicemail from Sarah, about what I had learned from Jessica, about how Daniel had already found people close to me. I told him about the fear, the way it had settled into my bones, the way I couldn't breathe without wondering if he was right behind me. The officer listened, taking notes. When I finished, he exhaled and leaned forward. You need to be prepared, he said. Even with this report, even with the restraining order, there's only so much we can do. If he violates it, we can arrest him. But until then, he let the words hang between us. Until then, I was still on my own. I clenched my fists. I understand. We filed the report. We left the station. And I waited. For days, there was nothing. No calls, no messages, no sightings. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. I felt the silence wrapping around me like a noose, tightening with every hour that passed. Then, one morning, I woke up to an email. No subject line, no message, just an attachment. A photo. It was me, from yesterday, walking out of the shelter. My heart stopped. I sat up so fast my vision blurred, my fingers fumbling as I hit call on Lisa's number. She answered immediately. Charlotte? He found me, I whispered. I sent her the photo. There was silence on the line. Then, finally, Lisa exhaled sharply. We're not running anymore. I swallowed hard. What does that mean? It means it's time to stop playing defense. A plan. A way to fight back. For the first time since I left, I felt something other than fear. I felt ready,